having raised, I think, 10 rounds of capital in the last decade, lots of conversations where in other markets, deals based on where they were would unequivocally have closed, where despite outperformance relative to a plan, people were looking for reasons to say no rather than reasons to say yes, honestly. Our investors had this phrase, it's like investors have deep pockets but short arms now. That certainly rang true. Having a business where there is no question that the market opportunity is there. There is a team with sort of the experience in different but analogous ways of building either technology for advisors or using, legacy data sets to create better experiences, et cetera, was quite compelling. Fortunate to have the ability to continue to invest and innovate in this space.
David, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged. Thanks for joining me.
Of course.
Awesome. Well, let's start right away from the top. Tell me about Harness. What are you guys doing?
For the builders out there, Harness is meant to be a one-stop shop for navigating your most complicated financial issues. And for us, that typically starts with tax advisory. We've been a marketplace now for almost 6 years, spanning financial planning, holistic wealth management, personal tax, business tax, trust and estate. But for many like you, Jeff, like me, et cetera, navigating, starting a business, receiving equity-based compensation, getting K1s from private investments tends to be sort of the tip of the spear of complexity that we bring. And so we have a more modern approach, both to finding the right advice and to actually having a contemporary 21st century experience in the way that you interface with a tax expert to navigate those things.
Right. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but like my experience has been, financial advisors, I find a lot of those people come to me a lot, but it's like the tax advising is the confusing piece, and not a lot of them have that element. And those are two different groups of people.
That is definitely the case. I mean, we started Marketplace with some of both, and the demand was higher and the supply was dramatically lower for tax advisors that had the expertise to navigate the nuanced issues that our clients had, basic tech enablement, firm professionalism, capacity, and a price point that we thought was compelling, being under 5 figures, which is too often for sort of the professional tax solutions. And so we built our own proprietary practice management solution that allows us to partner with some of the best boutique practices and breakaway senior folks from top 25 firms that are eager to deliver that same best-in-class advice, but through our tech experience.
And it's obvious why you'd want to do this, because there is definitely an opportunity in this space. Where there is a problem, there is an opportunity. But why for you personally? Like, what was it that you said, I wanted to tackle this problem?
There's sort of like a academic answer, and then there's like a personal acute pain point one. So the
Let's do them both.
Is, I spent 5 years at Compass. The underlying narrative of that success story, now the largest real estate brokerage advisory platform in that space in the country, really was around tech enabling advisors and not disrupting the central role of the agent, but actually creating technology to help make them more efficient, modernize the experience that their clients would have in working with them. And that idea of giving advisors that people still care about, want to have a better set of tools to create high value client experiences felt like in 2018, when I was an exec in residence at Bain Capital Ventures, like a theme that was still in a fairly nascent stage and with a lot of opportunity. The personal pain point is when I got the gig to lead, finance and ops when Compass was in the embryonic stage, there was a question about how we should design our equity program. And I asked 2 Harvard Business School entrepreneur professors, like the wise men of sort of that space.
Right.
Got advice that ended up costing me personally and others like 7 figures. And so there's nothing like the cold realization of money left on the table to spur action.
Right.
So there's also that driver of like, gosh, the right advice for some, in some instances, maybe the wrong advice for others. And so figuring
Mm-hmm.
out ways to not just have DIY or generic advice, but really have the right customized solution for people, something that became near and dear to my heart, I guess.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, with any of these opportunities and challenges, like timing's a thing, right? And I think there is a time now we can enable with technology to do a lot of better things. Is there any sort of driver around different generations of people like maybe using the technology? I think I've heard that some newer generations are a little bit more skeptical of financial advisors, or, they're kind of doing it on their own. There's complexities in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are both, I think, advisor elements to that answer and consumer elements. I think in the tax space, our view is that a disproportionate amount of the advisors are still living in a tech 1.0 system, which is email, back office software to actually complete the tax return, and then some probably 20-year-old technology to upload documents to that clients may or may not use. And I would say the big thrust of what we're doing is building the foundations for a robust 2.0 transition, which is how do you automate and digitize things that still embraces the role of the very human, dedicated advisor client relationship, but creates more visibility, efficiency, and hopefully insight. The
Right.
3.0 world, which is what is exciting, but you can't leapfrog in most cases from 1 to 3, is the AI applications, the customized insights coming out of one's tax data, et cetera. And the goal is that we can through success in 2.0 also introduce 3.0 in ways that is not too fast for advisors to adapt, or too clunky or error prone for consumers to want to be interfacing with. I think to your broader question around advice, I think part of our view was that there is some understandable aversion to paid financial advice generically. I think
Right.
when people meet with some of the really good advisors that have expertise in navigating specific professional or asset class type nuances, people realize, hey, they're not charging this huge fee on every dollar that I have. Maybe they're charging on a portion that they manage, but they're advising on a much broader set of things, and they're unlocking value that is hopefully a multiple of the fee that they're creating. Then like the financial advice can be quite additive too. But our solution, unlike many others out there, does not say, hey, come to us, pay us a big fee, we're going to do 7 different things and one size fits all. It's very
Right.
much for the consumer client. Whatever you need, we want to be a resource. We got a lot of stuff on platform. We got a lot of content, free tools, etc. We are geared towards a more sophisticated audience, but we only want to charge someone, monetize something if it's going to create value for them.
What was one of those things that you went into, you know, building this business thinking one way, and as you got into it, you realized, man, it might be the 180 flip on what this really is?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we got right was just this shift towards next generation wealth creators that are typically, though not always now, kind of in that 30 to 50-year-old zone, having a bit more of a DIY inclination, being more skeptical of traditional models of financial advisory or things that are really high margin and not necessarily the most, client friendly, et cetera. I think what we sort of discovered in the process was the importance of good tax advice and how that's really a missing ingredient for many very good financial advisors, area that a lot of people don't have the highest level of satisfaction, area where people actually want to, or at least are willing to pay more than they currently are,
Right.
if it's demonstrable ROI, which good tax advice can very easily create, and much more so than many other advisory verticals tends, if it's done really well, to actually create a multiple of the cost to receive in its value to the client. And so we did not start the journey thinking we were going to build practice management software for tax. We sort of thought that was kind of like, hey, it's a piece of this next generation family office model for much wider swath of equity owners and builders, and
Right.
found a big opportunity in terms of unmet demand and unrealized supply.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's funny. I think it's people underestimate the value of these micro and macro pivots within growth companies. And, I work with a lot of investors, and a lot of investors look for people that can do that, because every venture-backed company is doing something that's never been done before. You can't just write a business plan and implement it. It has to be this reoccurring learning loop and changing and iteration and moving and, getting to different stages of the mountain and getting different perspectives and taking different paths. And some will work and some don't, but the ability to, iterate and change within that plan is like so important.
Yeah, and that I think certainly was my lived experience at Compass, where we started with a salaried agent model, replacing the traditional agent, and actually realized we were right that residential real estate needed innovation. It needed more end-to-end experience innovation. It turned out, at least for us and for Compass, innovating on the role of the brokerage rather than of the broker or agent was the area to create more value and scale faster. And I think same thing here, where we see and have from the beginning a ton of value in sort of a next generation model to find the right advice and collaborate with advisors. But it was sort of like in it and seeing
Right.
the data and seeing the user behavior that we're like, oh my, like tax really is super critical and an area that we can really create meaningful value.
Yeah. Sometimes the only way to figure that out is to be in it and do it. Right. Like you can't see some of these things from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think it's been a challenging, past few years, depending on where you hit the cycle of businesses that, have done that successfully or like should have, but for hitting the market at the wrong time,
Right.
SVB sort of 2020, late 22, 23 kind of freeze over, et cetera, and feel fortunate that we've had the ability to grow well and sort of evolve where they're the most value that we can create.
Yeah, I think that's really totally right on. There's been a lot of changes in the market, a lot of changes. A lot of the teams that we work with, a lot of our teams have been able to evolve and scale and evolve and evolve. And if you don't have that muscle built into your organization, it's really hard for
Yeah.
you to make those pivots and changes and keep getting yourself funded and keep growing. It's really difficult. So you saw, the whole experience. I think you went from probably like director of ops to COO to CFO within Compass while you were raising a lot of money there. Did that help your experience raising now with Harness?
For sure. I mean, I think I was fortunate to have the trust of the two founders in really driving the fundraising process in a way that in most businesses, sort of the founder CEO does him or herself,
Mm-hmm.
Leading 6 rounds of capital raising for the business, several $100 million, ton of rejection, understanding how to tell the story, especially because like in 2014, 15, 16, I mean, that was before there were a lot of success stories in tech enabled services, and answering that question. Wait, is this just a traditional brokerage with a big R&D spend? Is this actually a technology company, got reasonably good at, or at least,
Right.
a lot of reps at, sort of explaining that I think made it possible to do something, a little bit different again, but powering sort of that same thematic idea around in a lot of spaces, advisors are not going away. And those that can create technology that is collaborative with the advisor rather than competitive to them or very sort of anti human guidance driven can be quite successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Fundraising is challenging in this market. And you guys just raised a Series A earlier this year.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
They
Okay. So what was your experience with that round?
I mean, pretty brutal. I think, I'd just say brutal, but I think they're having raised, 10 rounds of capital in the last decade. Lots of conversations where in other markets, deals based on where they were would unequivocally have closed, where for despite outperformance relative to a plan, people were looking for reasons to say no rather than reasons to say yes, honestly.
Right.
And one of our investors had this phrase, it's like investors have deep pockets but short arms now. That certainly rang true. I think having a business where there is no question that the market opportunity is there is a team with sort of the experience in different but analogous ways of building either technology for advisors or using, legacy data sets to create better experiences, et cetera, was quite compelling.
Yep.
And, fortunate to have the ability to continue to invest and innovate in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it doesn't matter. I mean, I've been in tech for just over about 25 years and helped a lot of companies raise and grow their companies. There's times when there's not a lot of funding and there's times when there's been a lot of funding. But one thing that holds true is being as efficient as you possibly can with that capital. Because the reality is we're in a science experiment. These companies are doing things that have never been done before. So we have to test a lot of things to figure out what works, what doesn't work, double down, triple down on the things that work, hopefully quickly, make micro pivots on the things that we're trying that aren't working. But there's a learning loop in these companies. And I think some people kind of just think, no, this is chaos. But I think the reality, it's the exact opposite. I think the companies that are the most organized tend to always win. They're most organized at trying a bunch of things, figuring out what works, double down on things that work, stop the things that don't work. And that's just like the scientific method and process.
I think it's easier said than done to find the right balance, though, between not being fickle and sort of like having an idea, running at it, like another shiny object is somewhere else, running at that, et cetera. And so it's this very careful balance that we definitely haven't gotten perfectly right of how do you have enough conviction to keep investors and like the general employee base, whether it's 10 people, 100 or 1,000, inspired and feeling like there is a plan. And as a CEO and or founder, you've got to absorb some of that ambiguity and having high conviction, but a high aptitude to like learn and adapt. And I'm still, figuring out the perfect balance of that.
Well, I think that's probably the most difficult part for CEOs and founders and their teams is that they have this vision. Things keep on changing. Everybody's their boss, right? Investors are your boss. The board's your boss. The clients are your boss. Even your employees, feel like your boss because you want everyone to be happy and make success. And the reality is that vision slowly changes and that 1-year plan changes and that financial plan changes. And those things are always constantly changing. One of the things that I found with teams that I work with, and I didn't do this right with my first business, believe me. I built my first business, luckily sold it, graduating college. I should have held on to it and built it longer. But I built a business plan and we just moved. You know what I mean? And things worked and we grew and some things didn't work, but we just kept on moving. But we never had that checkpoint of like every quarter bringing the leadership team together, looking at what's working, what's not working, deciding what we should change, what we shouldn't change, or didn't even have that weekly meeting to keep things on course and triage the things that weren't working, right? We just kind of built this plan and just ran. And I think that's super common with founders and teams. And if you do that, you don't have that learning cadence or that, regrouping every quarter and every week, when those things start to change, people don't really realize it. And sometimes the teams start going different directions up that hill or at different hills or peaks. And it's hard to know sometimes. And I think that was probably one of the biggest lessons learned for me and why I'm passionate about operating systems, probably because I made that mistake in my earlier businesses.
For sure. And it's amplified if you are either iterating or pivoting. I mean, and there's a big delta between what you, if you're fortunate to be one of the people kind of in the room making a decision, know and what you believe because you said it once the team that they heard, remember, et cetera, in the sort of moments, at Compass of like you believe that we've articulated exactly what this new model is and why that's great and the value proposition. And then you sort of ask some of your clients, the agents, some of the employees, and you're like, what they just said is not at all, what we or hope that we're doing, really focusing on that clarity of communication. And that's also an area that I continue to work on is like, how do you repeat in compelling and engaging, not just annoying and repetitive ways in a manner that's going to like help people and reinforce a certain view of what the company is doing and can be.
Yeah. That balance is really hard. I totally agree with the balance because one of the things I always advocate is that we build the plan together with the leadership team. We get information from the team going into those sessions every 90 days. So we're building from the bottom up, but decisions are made within that meeting. And then we take them back to the teams and we may iterate from there. So it's kind of a back and forth. But the hard reality is not everybody's going to be in that room. If you cascade those meetings always before the board meeting, that really helps. But it's an iteration back and forth. But not everybody can be in those rooms, so it can be challenging. But doing it the best you can together, I always feel like it's been the right thing to do. How are you guys keeping alignment doing that?
Yeah, we're about 30 folks today, a 5-person leadership team. So like a meaningful chunk of that employee base. I think we're fortunate that all of the members of the leadership team have been part of successful growth stage businesses. And so I think good operational execution does not create success or find opportunities, but it certainly can mitigate problems you need to solve for or amplify success when you find a good fit. I think very similar to a lot of the stuff that you talk about or have written about, of having quarterly goal setting cadence, of kind of checking in and having visibility across the organizations just mentioned around those areas. Like I think for the flavors, like I sort of ripped off the Elon Musk Tesla sequencing of how a company making a high-end car is going to sort of help change the world from a oil and gas to different power source type of ecosystem. For the first,
it's not about building cars. It's
right.
about changing to a different energy source or whatever that is.
Exactly. And I have done a version of that. I've not consistently revisited to that, but rolled out at the end of last year. We had our second or third in-person all-team meeting, which has been great for a company that is about half in New York and half scattered elsewhere, of what we hoped to achieve in 2024, 25, and 26, and how those things connect together with more specificity in the actual deliverable numbers for 24, but sort of percents and things that can build on that to show directionally how that can compound and relate without it being fictitious of X. We're going to do X revenue in 2026. That's kind of hard to predict with any semblance of credibility. And so I think that's been effective. And then revisiting that and their components and underlying assumptions, that even right now as we're doing our Q4 planning, we're saying, gosh, like, hey, ASP expectation in the 2025 plan that ladders up probably needs to be readjusted. And so what does that mean for the more tactical things that we want to plan for, do, et cetera, in Q4 and in the first half of 2025?
Yeah, that's awesome. That is the way to do it. That is the way to do it. Sometimes it's hard for early new founders to know kind of these processes and systems, but a lot of this stuff is out there now if you look, but sometimes just the day-to-day activities you can lose yourself in those really quickly, I think, when things are moving fast. So one last question I have before my final question is, I just want to get where does Harness look like in the future? Like, what's the vision? What do you guys see? What are you building towards?
I mean, we feel like there's this unique data set and obviously sort of annual, if not quarterly, recurring need to solve for tax that we're really addressing. But I think it's more around how tax can sit at the intersection of this broader financial planning and making a process that is painful, expensive when you get it wrong, maybe still expensive when you get it right, but to a lesser degree, but really can help inform dramatically better financial decision making, wealth optimization, et cetera. And so I think building the foundation here, but being able to connect it to enable our clients just to make a host of better decisions and get to meaningfully better outcomes. And the value of providing an ongoing service is that the value you can create can compound on itself, both through the direct service and some of the other pieces of it. So yeah, the more value that we can create for the consumer clients, and that also goes for the advisors. Like, it's a field where there is increasing demand, decreasing supply. It is a much harder profession than certain other advisory services because there is technical need, there's seasonality, all this stuff. And so I think we'll be able to better enable this very thoughtful, generally client caring market with solutions that make them better, have a more sustainable life, create more value, et cetera, is also really impactful and meaningful.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
You have the benefit of both having been an entrepreneur and now seeing lots of different companies at this sort of, millions of revenue scale, growing quickly. I think one of the things that you find maybe a step later people didn't know was an issue or thing you needed to solve that, just from pattern recognition, you sort of say, hey, this is worth thinking about sooner than you would imagine.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I do see the same things at different stages, and it's just different scale. Or as one mentor told me once, he said, Jeff, everything that we're all doing as CEOs is the same. It's just different zeros, right? So good and bad zeros. So one thing I think is so important is that cadence of defining like your vision and writing it down and defining like what's success at the end of the year, writing it down. What's success in the next 90 days? We like to use OKRs.
Mm-hmm.
We also like to define those KPIs for the end of the year and have that as these focal points so we can kind of track ourselves up the mountain and from peak to peak. I think you can't do that too early. Like even seed stage, I think it's so important to do that. Those points are going to change. And as they do, it's important that the team's involved at every step of those changes. And so I think that cadence of doing that, annual session, that quarterly session, and that weekly session as part of your leadership team. And then as you grow, use that same cadence in each of the functional areas of the business, or every single team within the business can use that process. And that allows that alignment, which is the most important thing. If you don't have alignment, meaning you don't agree on these points, then and people don't know what the points are, then you're not being capital efficient. So once you agree what they are, we agree what they are, and even if we disagree, but we disagree and commit, now we can define what we need to do, how we're going to do it, who's going to do it, when it's going to get done by, and have a process to iterate those along. So I think out of everything, I think that's probably the most important thing. The thing that I see that a lot of teams just don't dial in well enough.
No, it's super helpful. I think just reinforces the most important things, the things you got to stay committed to, whether that's, showing up at the gym the same number of days every week, or,
right.
There's not one pill or one intervention that makes the company successful. It's kind of the creating good repeat behavior that sort of happens without having to think about it, it sounds like.
And that's such a good analogy too, because how many people get that gym membership at the end of the year and have this big idea of what they're going to do, and the beginning of the year starts and they get to the gym and they're working out super hard and they're doing it, so they're hitting it, and then they kind of miss a day, and then they start eating bad again, and next thing you know, this is the same as the company. This is I come in and they like set their plans for the year, and we come in and it's mid-year and they're like, hey, we need help. And I'm like, why aren't you talking about these things that are off? And they're like, oh, they're off. We know they're off, but we just stopped talking about them. And it's like, okay, well, that's why you need to just be, like you said, disciplined. Grab your gym clothes and just show up. If you can keep showing up for those annuals and show up for those weeklies, like things will iterate and change, and you'll make progress. That's a great analogy, I think. Yeah. All right. Let me ask your final question here. So this is probably the most important question you've ever been asked. So I'm glad you're sitting down. This is a scenario. You are stranded on a desert island the rest of your life. Now, it's a great island. It's tropical. It's beautiful. So I hope you like that, because that's where you're stuck. Plenty of food and water and shelter. But the one thing that you're missing is no entertainment. There's no entertainment on this island. Now, luckily, an old 80s boombox drifted ashore with endless batteries, but you can only bring one cassette tape. What are you going to bring?
It's so funny. Like the first thing that my mind gravitates toward is the only like single cassette that I remember that I had, which is "Oh What a Night," which is like 80s vintage, etc. I don't know that would be the actual selection. I kind of think that it ends up having to be like classical music in the same way that I actually like my wife and I sort of differ. Like I tend to, when I'm doing work like jazz, she actually is a marathon runner and can listen to classical music, for, miles and miles, which is not me. From that, like having something you can listen to, the songs are longer, so it's kind of cheating on the exercise to some degree. But I think having that ability to sort of like relax and create a sense of calm, even in an environment which I think would be stressful, despite having, the abundance of resources you have, that is pretty unique. But, hopefully there's a chance to stow away and get some extremes on either end.
So are you thinking Bach, or what album would that be?
Yeah, the one that I've listened to the most of is Mozart for Babies, having, a soon to be 3 and a little past 1-year-old at home.
I haven't heard that for so long. I had that CD for my young kids.
The beauty is like with Spotify, it's sort of like an endless soundtrack. So I'm not sure I could, pick, just one, but.
So you'll go with Mozart then. The final answer is Mozart.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. All right, David, thanks for joining me on the show. I appreciate it.